So I apologize, everybody. Had some technical difficulties this morning. I'm excited about today's show. I've been waiting for this for a bit, and this is all about the earned income credit. That's what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of days, and we've been building up to this for a while. But real quick, just want to go to thank everybody for watching live or on rebroadcast. Sorry to the technical difficulties. It will be a shortened show, but we're going to be talking about this for the next couple days and making sure we get this put together. So real quick, as far as the IRS news, the IRS has put out an alert yesterday about making sure that when you're putting health expenses, make sure you're claiming the right kind of expenses. So medical reimbursement arrangements, medical savings accounts, personal expenses are not deductible. So again, straight from the IRS commissioner, says legitimate medical expenses have an important place, but you should have to be careful to follow the rules. Things like food for weight loss qualify for reimbursement, but they don't qualify as medical expenses. So a lot of these are promoted. There's a lot of bad information out there, and that's part of what we're going to talk about the ERC. There's been a lot of bad information out there, and just want to kind of paint the broad picture here as we dive into the ERC. So this is all, like a lot of the programs we've been hearing about over the last few years, are all about COVID. They're all about coming back from COVID. Some of these programs were around beforehand. You had the PPP, EIDL, and now the ERC program. So this is employee retention credit. So it's a credit for retaining employees even though the market went down through these critical quarters in 2020 and 2021. So the general gist of it is the government, to help people out, they gave out a lot of money. And not a little bit, a lot of money. And then they wanted people to pay the money back. So that's the concern here, is that, can we pay the money back? What's going on here about paying? The government's trying to claw back a lot of that money. So with the PPP, if you qualified forgiveness, great, it's essentially done. But there's a lot of fraud. So the IRS is going back and investigating people for not only PPP fraud, but EIDL fraud. If you default and you don't have a good reason for that, that's going to be an issue. So again, we're hitting a break and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back, everybody. So again, talking about these programs, PPP, EIDL, and now the ERC programs, the government gave out a lot of money, and with recognizing that there's fraud in the system, that there's issues, that they're going to push this forward. They're going to try to they're trying to get this money back as much as possible. And they know that whenever Congress passes something that's not well defined, and they're figuring it out as it goes, there's going to be a lot of clawback at the end. So there's going to be consequences if it didn't follow the rules, but the rules weren't well defined. There was a lot of promotions that got people to apply for these programs, and people didn't even know. So the IRS does have some programs because they know what happened. They know that they threw up in the floodgates and said, hey, everybody apply for this. This is a wonderful thing. They did it for PR purposes. But at the same time, the floodgates were thrown a little too wide, and now they're trying to backtrack. And now they're claiming, okay, well, if you didn't clearly follow these rules, they're going after people, and they're going to be investigating and auditing a lot of people. It'd be over 20,000 letters went out in December. So I kind of want to take a step back and talk about what is the ERC program. So employee retention credit, you can be eligible for it if you operated a trade or business and had employees that paid wages between March 13th of 2020, which is when COVID officially started, and December 31st, 2021. So the quarters that they're looking at are the second, third, and fourth quarters of 2020, and then the first 4 quarters, well, all 4 quarters of 2021. And so you had to have lost income that had been hurt by COVID. So if the government shut you down or something, or you lost money and your income shows that you have lost money through this period, you're eligible for the credit. Now you have to, a lot of people are going back and amending these older returns through the 940s and 940s and 941s to show that, hey, this is what actually happened. And it doesn't mean you can't amend your returns, but it really got put out there because this is one of the biggest ways to get money from the IRS. And so their CPAs, the law that they passed, they didn't want this to be a huge moneymaker. They didn't want people to go nuts. So they limited, in Congress's wisdom, they limited how much CPAs could charge for this. So CPAs really can't do most of the work, but it's the CPAs that have most of the ethical responsibilities here. So what happened is almost immediately a little cottage industry popped up of people selling ERC services. So they were the go-between, the middleman, so to speak, between the taxpayers and the CPAs that would actually do the work. And because Congress put such a floor on this for the ERC applications, they limited how much the CPAs could charge. Most CPAs are like, okay, why am I going to advertise for this? Why am I going to put a lot of money out? And so these companies were like, hey, we can give CPAs a lot of work and get this done, and we can do a lot of good for people. All these are all of these people bad actors? No. In my opinion, most of them were trying to help people take advantage of a government program. It's well within their rights to do so. Now, the IRS is, the government typically likes to throw shade or blame somebody, call someone out as a bad actor here. It's been sloppy lawmaking on the part of Congress and the IRS, which happened with PPP and the EIDL floodgates. Lots of money lost by the government, and now the government is trying to claw that money back. So it's very typical whenever you see some of these programs. Personally, I did not touch the PPP program because I didn't trust the IRS. I didn't trust the government. A lot of people did, and it worked very well for them. I did take an SBA loan. I kept it small, something that I could afford. But as far as the ERC loan, I didn't touch it again because now it's a big mess. And the IRS has taken quite a few steps to either tamp down on this or limit what people can get from the, not limit, but they've taken quite a few steps to kind of stop the floodgates here. So essentially the IRS didn't foresee that this would be a huge program. And so because of the advertising by companies that could charge more, and most of them charge a percentage of what companies were going to get back, and usually it's around 20 to 30%. So a hefty fee, but at the same time, people were still getting huge chunks of money back from the IRS. And either 20,000 or over 100,000 or more, depending on how big the business was and what they qualified per the program. So a lot of money was flowing to companies, and these ERC companies were making money. CPAs were getting a lot of work in the off season, but the way these companies are set up, they don't have any CPAs or attorneys within their company. So they're literally the middleman between the CPA that can't charge that much and the client. And so it really, this was promoted, and the IRS is claiming, oh, there's scam promotions and there's false promotions. I'm sure there was some of that, but I think the vast majority, in my opinion, were legitimate companies seeing an opportunity and taking advantage of it. That's just how the market works. Now, the IRS, when they first opened this up, they got a flood of applications starting last summer. So they got tons of applications. They were overwhelmed almost immediately. They were plowing through it as best they could, and more applications started coming in. So the IRS said, "Oh, stop." They put a moratorium on new applications. So you could still file, but they put an moratorium on when they would be processing these more applications. I believe that was November, December of last year. You can still file, but they were not processing anything new. They're trying to work through the backlog, but they're also training. A lot of employees are being trained right now on how to handle and process these because the IRS is not ready. And they're overwhelmed. Again, typical IRS, typical government, where they get overwhelmed, they don't know how to handle it. The customer service is just plummeted. And they're also taking this time to catch up on their fraud investigations. That is a big concern here. So the IRS is actively investigating people for fraudulent claims. If you got a letter claiming that you shouldn't have gotten as much ERC as you received or that you shouldn't have gotten it at all, you need to follow up on this. Once they start investigating you, then you need to deal directly with the investigators. A lot of voluntary programs that they've been coming out with lately are not available to you. So if you're concerned about this, I don't want to freak people out, but I want to be very straight and honest with people. The IRS is coming back with a vengeance when it comes to ERC claims and cases. So make sure that you have good information. You might want to review it with the CPA and say, hey, is this correct? Does this look good? And unfortunately, most of the CPAs doing this are not people's regular CPAs. There are CPAs that did this, but you might want to run it by your regular CPA, pay them to review it. Again, this is kind of the worst time that they're doing this because everybody's slammed. But the IRS has specific deadlines that they put out. So I believe it was March 22nd. I took some notes here for the voluntary disclosure program that they just came out. And this is what I want to spend the bulk of the conversation. So they want people to self-report more than anything else. And they have these programs to encourage people to self-report and say, hey, I guess I don't think I qualified. And so the IRS is, I'm not sure if I qualified. If I didn't qualify, my bad, I'm going to step back. And they have two programs. One where you just withdraw from the program. So if you haven't gotten the funds yet from the ERC, you can voluntarily withdraw. No harm, no foul. The IRS will leave you alone if you haven't gotten any money. If you have gotten money from the IRS already, and it had to be before, I believe, December 31st, so they don't want people jumping into this, but this is something retroactively that they're doing for people that already received money. They're telling them, hey, give us 80% of the total. We're not even going to charge you interest. Just give us back 80% of what you received if you don't think it was done correctly, and we'll let you go. I mean, there's an application process through it, but that's the gist of it, is that they have these two programs that they've opened up. But the IRS is ignoring one key factor. When companies and individuals signed on with these companies, they signed contracts. And these contracts did not contemplate voluntary withdrawal programs or returning 80% of it to the IRS. So their fees were based on the total amount that they qualified for. Now, each contract is different. Each company can be different, but I've seen some of these and reviewed these with some clients where you might still be on the hook to pay the company even if you give the money back to the IRS. So that 20% probably isn't going to be in your pocket after everything's said and done. So these companies offer to represent people in these appeals processes and in contesting this. This is going to be a really big issue, and it's going to create a lot of litigation here as these companies contest this. But as individuals, if you voluntarily withdraw, and they've already done all their work and earned their fee, that's going to be a big problem here. And you know who's stuck in the middle are the actual taxpayers. So I want to just word to the wise, the IRS is not looking at the whole picture here. They don't care what happens between the taxpayers and the companies that sold these services. And so you need to look at your contract very carefully. You might not want to call them, but usually, I mean, this is a money-making enterprise. They're out there to make money. They came in, did their work, showed what you qualified for, and their fees are based on what you qualified for. And especially if they got you this money, now it's a legal conundrum between the taxpayer and these ERC companies that have popped up all over the place, because now the IRS is changing the rules. And then, so be very aware, talk to whatever company you've worked with, figure out how they're going to react if you do a voluntary withdrawal and just withdraw the whole thing. And most of their advertising is like, if you don't get anything, we don't charge anything. But if you do a voluntary withdrawal and you choose not to proceed, that's very different than everything's been submitted, they did all their work. So again, there could absolutely be some legal liability here. And if you return 80% of the funds, you might owe more than 20% of it to the ERC company. So you're still in the hole. So the IRS might sound like they're being very generous, but they're aware of these issues. They know about these issues. They just don't really care. So again, this is another program that sounded too good to be true. You know, it really opened the floodgates. A lot of people applied. The IRS is overwhelmed, and so they're doing two things. They're training people on how to process these ERC claims because they're overwhelmed. That's why one of the reasons they did the moratorium. But number two, they're training people to go through these forms, not just to process them, but to scrutinize them, to look for mistakes, to look for problems so that they can be rejected. And the IRS isn't going to say it like that, but they're going to, that's essentially what they're doing. So, you know, be very aware. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on here was you've got a lot of programs that they've opened up. I'm going to mention some of them. I'm going to kind of take a deeper dive into some of these programs and talk about what might be a good fit for you. But again, I really wanted to focus on take a step back, talk to the company that you hired if you used a company. If you didn't use a company or you did it through your CPA and he didn't charge you a huge fee, you're in a much better position than most people. But talk to whoever did this, say, look, this is what's going on. Take it to a second CPA, get a second opinion as to whether or not this was a good fit for you. But the IRS is absolutely scrutinizing these, looking at these very carefully, and they're looking to reject them. And if they start investigating you, this is not just, hey, collections is looking at you. They're looking for fraud. So really the IRS wants the money back, but this is it's not exactly criminal investigations, but it's this civil investigations. So if they start investigating you, take this seriously, because if they find intent, or if they can allege intent, that's where it becomes fraud. It becomes a criminal matter. And that's where you're going to be in a world of hurt, paying very expensive attorneys to deal with this. So this is why I've been wanting to talk about this, because it is a big issue. It's front and center for the IRS right now. They're training hundreds, if not thousands, hundreds of employees on this. Probably not thousands, but they're training them to detect fraud, to go after fraud, and do these investigations. So they're not just rubber stamping and just processing paperwork as fast as they can. They're slowing down And they will be going back and reviewing the ones they've already approved. So you might think you're in the clear, you got the money, everything's fine. These are specifically the ones that they're looking at. These are the ones where if you've already gotten the money prior to December, that they're going to be looking at and saying, hey, if you didn't qualify for this, here's your window to give 80% of the money back. And it's not often that the IRS says, hey, give us 80% back without interest and we'll call it good. That is extremely uncommon for the IRS. But it's due to the nature of the program and how it proceeded. So their enforcement was not up to par. Their training was not up to par. They weren't ready for this at all. Now they're getting ready. And so people want to know, when is this moratorium going to end so people can send in more applications? We don't know. The IRS doesn't know. They might not lift it. But that's kind of the ad hoc way this is being put together and followed. So if you're still interested in applying for the ERC credit, you can. Your application will go in line with everybody else's, but just make sure all your I's are dotted, T's are crossed, that there aren't any issues here. If there's no issues, then you can breathe easy. But again, I would get a second opinion. Make sure it's done right. And we're going to, coming up on another break here, and we're going to be talking about your options and what kind of options the IRS has laid out for you if for some reason you might not qualify. So again, just like other programs, if they find you first, the deals are off. No voluntary withdrawal. You can't do you can't voluntarily withdraw your application, or you can't return 80% of it and still keep 20% of it. So again, be very mindful of this, and we've got about 30 seconds, and we're gonna dive into those programs when we come back. Again, if you have any questions, give us a call at guardiantaxlaw.com. Unfortunately, this is going to create a lot of work for companies like my company because this isn't done right. And I would much rather have people avoid taxes, avoid issues, and we'll talk about that when we come back. Hubert Johnson here with Guardian Tax Law for Taxes Made Easy. Just following up with, going to wrap up the session on ERC, but again, it's one of those things to protect yourself, and get good information before you make a decision. The problem is with new programs like this, there isn't good information. The IRS doesn't know what they're doing. And so I actually made a mistake. I thought that I didn't know exactly when the moratorium started, but it was all the way back in September September 14th of last year. So the moratorium has been in place for a long time, 6 months roughly, and the government still isn't ready to start processing these applications anymore. They have a huge stack to go through. Unfortunate thing is it puts taxpayers like you in the crosshairs. So what to do about it? So I'm going to screen share. So this is from an IRS webinar. I'm going to steal their material and just going to hit a couple of highlights. So this is what the IRS steps they're taking to address these issues. So a moratorium on new ERC credit claims. So they haven't processed anymore. Doesn't mean they won't. So secondly, the IRS is mailing 20,000 disallowance letters. So if you get one of these letters, don't assume you're done. Talk to your company. Most of them guaranteed or had some kind of provision in there to help fight this and to appeal this. So if you receive one of these letters, respond. This is very important that you respond and that you address this. And it doesn't mean you're going to jail, but it does mean that you absolutely need to engage in litigation to address these claims. Now, with the if you haven't received a letter and here's a key thing, that if you get one of these letters, these other two options are off the table. If they spend any time and effort to find you and start investigating you, you have to engage in the litigation. These other options, the withdrawal options, aren't available, or the voluntary disclosure program. So be very mindful of this. I would get information now, make a decision on how you want to proceed. If you're going to do a voluntary withdrawal, be aware that you might have issues with your ERC company if you hired one of these companies to get this taken care of for you. Again, if you worked with your local CPA, go talk to your local CPA. It's very painful to give money back, especially if that money has already been used for the business. Most people that are doing this are not, you have struggled financially, so a lot of that money when they got in, it's been used, it's been addressed, which is one of the issues here. Now, IRS Voluntary Disclosure Program is what this particular webinar focused on. I'm not going to torture you with the hour and 15 minutes of webinar and details in the minutia. But going into the Voluntary Disclosure Program, again, this deadline is March 22nd. So that is 15 days from today. So this is a very tight deadline. And with the Voluntary Disclosure Program, this is where you only have to pay back 80%. You keep 20% of what you received, but you have to pay back the other 80%. No interest, no penalties, which is very unique for the IRS. But if you do that, there'll be no fuss, no muss. They'll leave you alone. But this is all about getting money back to the IRS, back to the government. So again, be very aware that this is a very serious issue. If you miss this deadline, then this voluntary disclosure program will no longer be available. The head of the IRS came out and stated that this is the best deal you're going to get. So that's why they put a very short timeline on it. Now, do you have to have the money up front? If you don't have the 80%, they actually have programs for you. And I want to talk about this a little bit. So there's an online application here. There's a form 15434. It's a new form the IRS put together. It's only a page and a half. It's not that difficult if you want to do the voluntary disclosure program. And you don't have to have the 80% in hand. You can do a 433B. There's some other forms that you can complete. Talk to a tax professional. Get this taken care of to apply for this voluntary disclosure program. And they even have an online portal to do this. As long as you have your documents for the voluntary disclosure program uploaded by midnight on March 22nd, you'll fall under this program. 1 a.m. March 23rd, program's done. The IRS has done this for FBAR claims and other programs as well when it became a huge issue, and they said, hey, if you do a voluntary disclosure, we'll only take so much of a penalty from you, and then we can move on. Here, you get to keep 20% of the ERC, but just be very aware of that contract that you might have with the ERC company that helped you qualify and do the application. Now, another concern here is you have to upload it by midnight on March 22nd. It's not just the form if you don't have the 80% up front. So if you do have the 80%, they prefer that you make the payment by EFTPS, or you can you can pay it by check, but you have to do a separate check for each quarter. You don't have to designate ERC at all. You just say this is for quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. They don't have it. Like I said, they're figuring this out as they go. They don't have a drop down to pay for this program yet. So you just have to make those payments to the quarters and pay back the 80% by check, or preferably online through the FTPS program. If you don't have that set up, just send it in by check. Now, if you don't have the money right now to send it in, you can do it on an installment agreement. So you do have to provide a 433B and some other paperwork if you're going to set it up in an installment agreement and pay the 80% back over time. And so it's still yet to be seen. I mean, to qualify for the voluntary disclosure program, you have to pay the 80% back. If you don't do it, then you're not gonna, if you're not gonna qualify for the program. It's pretty cut and dry. So what happens if you don't do the voluntary disclosure program, you don't do the withdrawal options, and they've already sent you a letter? What's gonna happen to these debts? So this is all new debt. It's gonna be a new type of penalty that the IRS is coming up with. So whenever you owe the government, as long as it's not fraud related, you can still go in and do an offer in compromise. You can do a hardship plan. Even with fraudulent debt, you can still usually do a non-collectible status or a hardship status if you qualify for it. The problem being here is if you can avoid it being labeled as fraud, do it at all. Fight hard to avoid that, because then it gets a 40-year statute. So it sticks around for 40 years instead of 10 years. And so again, because this is a new thing, still yet to be seen how they're going to treat these balances that are owed for the people that have already gotten disallowance letters. So that's why I would definitely appeal these. I would fight these if they've already sent you a letter, and make sure your rights are protected, because this is going to hurt. This is absolutely going to hurt. Now, one of the concerns here is, what do I do if I have this company and I paid them a lot of money and they're not working with me? So I'm going to jump. So you can report these companies anonymously. Like I said, a lot of them are just trying to make a living. That's capitalism. That's how our economy works. When opportunity presents itself, people will jump in and fill that niche. There was no niche. CPAs couldn't do it directly themselves and charge for it. So that's why all these companies popped up, and they were the middleman between the CPA and the tax preparer. But the way this was done was really funky. Most of these companies, they don't have any CPAs. They don't have any tax attorneys on board. They don't have anybody with fiduciary responsibilities where they have liability through their licensing or anything like this. So the way this was set up really was done very poorly, and I'm talking about on the IRS end. Now, if someone is being abusive and they're not working with you, you can report them. If they push you and promise you the sun, moon, and stars and told you to fudge the numbers or whatever, if you think it was fraud, you can either send it in, and you can do this anonymously as well, or you can go to get more information at irs.gov/ERC FAQ. And then there's also a hotline I want to touch on. So this is if you have questions about the voluntary disclosure program, if you have questions about the ERC program, there's a hotline to handle this, and it's 414-231-2222. So again, this is published really recently. This is a hotline that is available to the public. Most people don't know about it. Now, the funny thing with this hotline, nobody's going to answer it. Don't expect to be able to talk to a person. And that's the difficult part when the IRS is figuring things out, putting things together at the last minute. So you can leave a voicemail. That's the best the IRS has to offer right now. Like I said, they're training their people. They're getting them up to speed on how to process these returns, but also how to screen and determine which ones should be processed or which ones should be investigated. And I would expect a lot of investigations, but like I said, the IRS doesn't have the manpower, the training to investigate everybody. So that's why they have these programs now where you can voluntarily withdraw your application. You can do that anytime, or until March 22nd. You can say, my fault, my bad, and they're not going to, if you do this, they're not going to question it. Return 80% of the funds, or get an installment agreement to return 80% of the funds. Again, no interest, no penalties here. So this is essentially an interest-free loan. But you have to get on that and pay that off to qualify for that voluntary disclosure program. If you have any questions about the forms, that's something that we do on a regular basis. Not the brand new form to apply, but that's pretty basic. But doing the 433B, doing the installment agreement, and the other forms, that's something that's right up our wheelhouse. Again, you can reach out to us at guardiantaxlaw.com or 520-485-7371. And they're supposed to get back to you on that hotline, so that they'll probably call, leave a message. But that's the best way to reach out to somebody and try to get an answer on it. So there are a lot of facts, frequently asked questions on irs.gov. The last page that I had up had that website, irs.gov /ERC FAQ. If you just need more information about it, go to irs.gov /ERC. So again, the employee retention credit is one of the biggest things in the news, latest things in the news. And so be aware of this, protect yourself, protect your company, and don't just assume this is going to be nice and easy. Get a second opinion, do your due diligence. And the IRS loves to send letters en masse. And like I said, they send 20,000 out. If you think they had someone review 20,000 applications, I doubt it. So again, they're not always picky on, having people prove it up, regardless of what their actual application looked like. So if you do get one of those letters, contest it. One last thing I want to touch on real quick. There's some news as far as the budget, and I didn't mention this earlier. So the House of Representatives, with bipartisan support, so all the Democrats and a few Republicans passed a budget along. I think it was about half the Republicans. So we're not facing a budget shutdown, and this is for what's due on March 8th. They're kicking the can down the road, which, again, it's election season. They're just going to put it off till after the election and not make any massive changes to what's currently going on. So again, if you have any questions, call us at Guardian at 520-485-7371, and thank you for watching us here on the smartmoneyculture.tv. And again, if you have any questions, give us a call or reach out to us at guardiantaxlaw.com. Now, tomorrow or next week, I'm going to see if I can't get a CPA or an expert to come in and speak about the program, answer any, try to delve into this a lot more, because this is something that's real, it's happening, it's in the news. So again, having good information is absolutely key. Get good information, get a second opinion on this. And again, it's been mostly CPAs preparing all the documents, submitting them. As far as the second opinion, don't ask the tax company that you've been dealing with, the ERC company, because they don't have CPAs. They don't have attorneys, tax attorneys, from what I've seen. But take it to another CPA, get it reviewed, and then make a decision, but do it quickly before March 22nd if you're going to try for the voluntary disclosure program. And I hope you have a great Thursday heading into Friday, and we'll see you tomorrow morning bright and early, and answer your questions as we go through this, what's pressing and relevant today for IRS taxes.